Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I'm going to show you how to set up your UniFi U-NAS Pro right the very first time. We're going to walk you through everything, setting up your storage on there, setting up your RAID, setting up your shares, setting up your storage, setting up your access. Now, in order to go ahead with this guide, you're going to need a few things. Number one, you're going to need at least one hard drive. You can fully populate this device on day one, but you can go ahead, if you choose, to just add drives granularly over time, and the system will absorb those storage as you go along. So I'm going to have multiple drives inside this to show you what a fully populated state will look like, but you can go ahead with one drive if you choose. That doesn't even have to be a hard drive. You can go for one of UniFi's own drives or third-party drives from brands like WD and Seagate. I've tested all the way up to 24 TB Iron Wolf Pros, and they work like an absolute charm. You can use 2.5-inch SATA drives, but you won't really rank most of them on this. At least currently, the options for SSD caching are not there in the software. The next thing you're going to need is cables. A power cable arrives in the kit with this device that will go straight into your mains power. Don't connect that yet, but you may either need something like this. This is a copper Ethernet cable. This is one that goes into most of your traditional routers and switches there. Alternatively, you can take advantage of this fiber or SFP. The system has one port of each, but keep in mind the faster port is the 10G SFP. UniFi have got their own cables. Indeed, they've got their own racks as well. Keep in mind all of the products I'm going to talk about today, first or third party, I will link to them in the description below to give you some idea of what I've used in this guide. But personally, if you are engaging this device into an existing UniFi network, I strongly recommend using their SFP cables or even third-party 10G SFP cables. Make sure they're 10G certified, because that means you're opening up to 1,000 megabytes per second or 1 gigabyte per second throughput between this device and the rest of your local area network. So a good example would be connecting a copper cable here into either your switch or your existing Dream machine there, and then connect that cable there via the copper cable, and that means you've got that failover, but your primary connection can be that SFP cable. So the SFP, you connect it there into the UniFi system, slot that in like so, and then connect that cable into your main primary switch there via a 10G connection, and there you go. Now the NAS will not only be accessible on that 1000 megabytes per second connection, but will also have a failover. There are much better cables than this you could have used in terms of length, but I'm just using these really as an example. Keep in mind, of course, not all SFPs are built equally, and much like you can see here on the Dream machine, 10 GPE ports will have a little 10 and a world symbol next to them there. So keep in mind that you need this to be connected to the best connection on your available switch, but whatever switch you have will change the port you connect it to. And of course, remember, you don't need to be using a UniFi switch in order to proceed with this. You don't even need a UI.com account, something we'll talk about later on. But if you're connecting it to an existing UniFi network, that's the recommended setup I'd go for there. Now, when it comes to installing the hard drives, it's a very straightforward process. Generally, it's recommended you start from the top left as they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Go ahead and remove that first tray. Then from there, go ahead, get your hard drive. Make sure the interface, this case SATA, is pointing down and the drive is facing you. Then on the side, you can see the word pull. Pull that little lever and slide the drive into place. Now that drive ain't going nowhere. Go ahead and slide that drive into the available cavity there on the system. You'll know it goes in correctly because it will click, and there you go. Repeat that for every drive that you intend to install inside the system. Make sure that all of your cables are connected to your switch, although it's not essential, it will make the process easier, and go ahead and connect power to the rear of the device. Once you've connected power for the first time, you're going to hear your drive or drives start to spin up, and the little logo here on the front will show you that the system is powering up. Again, if you've got switches that are already in active use, these will already have those displays and actually display when the two are connected, but more on that later on. Wait for this bar to fill up to the top, and then go ahead and make your way over to either a desktop PC, a laptop, or even your mobile phone. Now, if you want to set the device up first time using a mobile phone, what you need to do is go ahead and download the UniFi application. There's a lot of applications you can see there on screen, but the third one along the UniFi, the big white circle one, that's the one you need. Also keep in mind that it's useful to have Bluetooth on and to ensure that you are connected to the same network as the UniFi U-NAS Pro device. Once you've got that all set up, go into the UniFi application. You may be invited to log in. Don't worry, that's not compulsory. As you can see, there's some devices listed there. Now, normally, if you go into the application, and if I go ahead and kill that application off there, you'll be able to see that once you first enter the UniFi app the first time, like so, it will find the device on the local area network and let you know you can continue with setup. But if it doesn't appear with that setup option, go ahead to the bottom and select set up a new device. Remember, if you choose to, you can sign into your account with your UI.com details in order to synchronize this with the rest of your UniFi controlled devices, your UDMs, your standard switches, your MVR, that sort of thing. Or alternatively, you can go ahead with this offline setup if you choose. By offline, of course, I mean on the local area network, but not utilizing the UI.com account. So go ahead and select set up a new device. If it is available on the local area network, as you can see, it's found the device there at the top, utilizing my Wi-Fi, in other words, on the same local area network. Or alternatively, click need help and you can use other means to connect to the device, utilizing the console manual setup there at the bottom to find the device manually on the local area network IP and more. But in my case, I'm going to go ahead and use that local area network. As you can see, the mobile phone is now communicating with the U-NAS Pro. Once it's done, it's going to ask me to name the device. I'm going to call it U-NAS Pro 2. Choose whether you want to sign up for analytics or not, and go from there. If you're already utilizing a configuration file from a previous U-NAS Pro installation, select Restore from a backup, and from there log in with your U-NAS credentials, your UI.com credentials, and you'll be able to find your backed up image that you've already synchronized and backed up onto the UI.com account. Otherwise, go ahead, go back and click Next. From there, it'll choose for you to go ahead to create a UI.com account if you haven't already got one. Keep in mind that with a UI.com account, you can access your server remotely, you can get access to a lot of the updates a great deal earlier, and you can use those online system configuration backups. Again, just go ahead and create a UI.com account and proceed from there if you choose. But if you don't want to create a UI.com account and you can add one later, go ahead, click Agree to Terms and Conditions, choose whether you want announcements or newsletters, and at the bottom, select Proceed without an account. But again, remember, you will lose out on some of the features of utilizing a UI.com account. Now go ahead and enter a password. Again, you can see the rules, but go ahead and enter that password now to create a locally accessed account. When you've entered that password, go ahead and set up local access. As you can see here, I've populated the device with a mixture of different hard drives. There's even a 24 TB there you can see towards the bottom, but we can only use 8 TB. Keep that in mind when putting drives in this system, that you can't mix and match drives. You can only put in the same storage drive. Any smaller drives will reduce the overall capacity of the system like any other RAID. But also, as mentioned earlier, you don't need to fully populate the device. But for now, go ahead and click Next. Choose whether you want to have a single disk redundancy, otherwise known as basic protection, or having higher protection. These will basically write out whether you will have 1 or 2 disks of failure. Traditionally, this would be a RAID 5 versus RAID 6, but the system does utilize a RAID 10 back-end functionality along the way. Alternatively, go ahead and choose whether you want to use a hot spare. A hot spare is when you have a drive sitting idle inside the system, and in the event of a drive failing, rather than waiting for you to action a RAID rebuild, a hot spare will automatically take the drive that's living in the system to rebuild the RAID. I'm going to go ahead with a hot spare and in a single disk redundancy there. Then go ahead and click Next. And now, as you can see, it's setting up the UniFi operating system on the device via the mobile app. It will take a few minutes to do this, but keep in mind that the hard drive synchronization will take longer, but more on that later on. But what about if you want to set the device up on a desktop? Setting up the device via the web browser is a little bit different. There's some good and some bad. If you want to go ahead and synchronize this with an existing UniFi network switch or a Dream Machine or anything like that, then you're going to be in luck. Just log in via the usual unifi.ui.com portal. From there, you're going to need to log in, and then from there, you can log into your existing switch. Again, you can do that via the local area network or remotely, and then from there, you can adopt the device. And again, pretty straightforward and quite similar to other UniFi devices, but a lot of you want to be very specific about the U-NAS Pro here. And if you don't want to create a UI.com account, or you want to create one later on and for now want to do it on the local area network, you're going to need one of two things. One, you could use an app like this one. This is an advanced IP scanner tool. This scans your local area network. As you can see, I've scanned my local area network, and there at the bottom, I found the U-NAS Pro and its IP, those two individual ports that it's got. Alternatively, what you can do is go to the front of your UniFi NAS device, and on the front there you've got that LCD panel, and then from there it will give you, under the ready to set up option, your IP, generally starting 192. Go ahead and enter that IP at the top of the screen in your web browser. Once you've added that IP, you'll get this option here, letting you know your connection is not private. This is because you're using a web browser that generally looks for a secure certificate then. Because you're accessing on the local area network, you're not utilizing a traditional secure certificate that a browser would usually associate with remote access. Don't worry about this. Just go ahead, click Advanced, and then click Proceed. Remember, this is because we're setting up this device on the local area network and not using a UI.com account, which will be using encrypted portals. Much like the mobile device, you can go ahead and give it a name, just like we're doing with a mobile setup, or if you've already got a backup on your UI.com account, enter those details there, and you'll be able to use a backup of the system configuration you may already have on your UI.com account. Go ahead and then click Next, and then from there, create a UI.com account if you choose to, as discussed, or at the bottom there, go ahead and proceed without an account if you choose to. I'm going to proceed without an account just to cover the bases, but every step you're going to see moving forward is largely the same. Go ahead, select Proceed without a UI account if you choose to, keeping in mind, as mentioned earlier, you will lose out on some of those benefits. Go ahead and click Continue anyway, and because you're going to access the device locally on the local area network, you need to create a local user login. I'm already going to create one here, but you go ahead and create your own username and password applicable to you. Once you've done that, much like you saw on the mobile app, there's our storage drives. Keep in mind all the drives need to be the same capacity, because if you do use a larger drive, you're going to lose that storage. I know I'm being repetitious, but it's important to understand what you gain and what you lose by using mixed drives, as well as different levels of 1 or 2 disk protection and that hot spare as mentioned earlier on. Go ahead and click Finish, and then from there the system will begin initializing and getting you ready for the desktop of the U-NAS Pro. Let's fast forward to the completion of this initialization. Heading on to the dashboard there, remember that the dashboard is accessible via that local area IP that we already created earlier on. Keep in mind again, if you are using a UI.com account, it will appear here under the site manager at unifi.ui.com. Again, I know I'm being repetitious, but it's important to understand that now. We're going in, it's initializing the UniFi drive, and what that means is it's now installing both the UniFi drive application for managing your storage, as well as beginning the initialization of the storage. Now, what does initialization of storage mean? Surely I've selected all of the drives, right? Well, at the top left here, we've got all of our storage drives. Now, once you set the device up for the first time, what it's going to be doing, as we open this window here, is creating our area of storage. If you click the arrow next to the available storage here, and then on the right hand side, go ahead and select Manage Storage in Control Plane. Alternatively, go into the cog on the left hand side of the screen. From there, select Control Pane, and then from Control Pane, select Storage. As you can see right now, even though the storage has been allocated, the top of the screen is showing synchronizing. That's because the drives have to be mapped out so that all read and writes are spread across all of the drives equally in order to ensure that parity, or the blueprint of your data, can be recovered in the event of a single drive failure. This means that for the next 10 hours, at least in my case, performance will be slightly lower as the synchronization needs to be conducted. So maybe give the system a good 10, 12 to 24 hours to complete that process in order to get the best performance out of your system. Next up, we want to create users on our device. We've only got one user right now, which is a power user, but we may want to create sub-users. So what we need to do now is go ahead into the settings menu. From the settings menu, go ahead and select admin and users. From admin and users, along the top of the screen, you've got users, admins, and identity endpoint. Now, identity endpoint is a further verification tool to ensure that only authorized and registered users can access the system, whether it is you're using a UI.com account or using third-party direct integration, such as the directory integration of Microsoft and Google, or taking advantage of existing databases you have. You can even add it to an existing workspace if you choose to. Again, it will come down to how much of the Enterprise Manager platform you choose to use. But for now, if you want to create just basic local users, go ahead, select the user tab, then create new user. Give the user a name. In this case, I'm going to call them Allen. Give them an email. I'm going to call them Allen@gmail.com. I'm sorry, Allen@gmail.com if you end up getting an email right now. And then from there, go ahead, give them an employee ID if you want to give them a number. Then select the level of access they've got to shared drives. We'll create more shared drives later, but this is the primary storage area. Or if you've got other shared drives, as mentioned later on in the video, you can add them and choose whether you want them to have full read-write access or only read-only access, which means they can see the data but not edit it in any way. Click Add for any drive you want to add to that user, and then click Create. They will ping an email to that user for remote level access if you are using a UI.com account for that further setup. If you want to edit a user's credentials, click on their name, then click the cog on the side, and you can change the level of access they've got, whether you want to add limits to the amount of storage they're allowed, and more. Next up, areas of storage or drives. Go ahead on the left hand side of the screen and select the Drive tab. From there, you can see the default drives that have been created on the system, but let's go ahead and create a brand new one. Go to the top and select Add Shared Drive, and then add a new shared drive. I'm going to call this NAS Compares Share. Say if you want there to be a limitation to the storage, so I'm going to go ahead and say that NAS Compare Share has only got 50 gigabytes of space, then select Who Has Access. If you've added additional users, give them access. If you want to say whether they've got read-only, that they own this, or that they can read and write, select as appropriate. I'm going to say Alan can only read this data. From there, click Add, and it will now create our new area of storage. There's the NAS Compare Share. From here, we can go ahead and go into it, and we can drag and drop files if we choose. So for example, if I go ahead and drag and drop some screenshots here, drag them into the window, it will upload them directly onto the NAS via the web browser. Alternatively, and we'll talk about this later, we could have mapped this to our Windows system via a shared drive, but more on that later. We can assess and change the viewpoint if we wish, double click, view the files. We can then choose more information on the side about the metadata. Alternatively, if we want to share a file, go ahead and select a file, like this one here, and right-click. If you want to share the file, click Share Link. From there, choose how long you want the link to last, how many times it can be accessed, and whether it needs a password. And once that's done, and you've selected all that information, go ahead and then create a share link. Keep in mind, of course, as mentioned, you will need a UI.com account to enable remote access. The reason being is remote access requires to relay via their servers, as you can see here via the Advanced Access tab. If you go ahead with remote access, as mentioned, you do need to create that UI.com account. Next up, snapshots. Now, snapshots are not strictly a backup, nor is redundancy for that matter when we are creating our RAID, but snapshots allow you to roll back the history of the data inside a given shared drive to an earlier state. Now, if we look at the range of folders we have here, we go back to the NAS Compares Share folder, we can double click and we can access that file and folder data. We can even create brand new folders if we choose to, but before we do that, what we want to do is set up a new snapshot. set up snapshot here, choose how many snapshots you want to create, and these are versions and images of this data created over time that we want to create. So I'm going to go ahead and create 60 snapshots. We're going to create them every single day at 12:15 a.m. in the morning when hopefully everyone's asleep, and it'll be every day, and then we click apply. And if we choose to, we can go ahead and create a snapshot ad hoc at any time. As you can see, I've created 2 snapshots right there, even though they're largely identical. And on the top right, we can review older versions of this data here. So for example, if we go to the current version and I go ahead and create a new folder here called Untitled Folder, and I dump some images into that folder. So we're just going to dump that one there. That's a new folder in there. We go back to NAS Compare Share. Let's say I've then gone ahead and deleted a bunch of this data. This is now going to be deleted, move to trash. That's all deleted. So now we've made a bunch of changes. But if I want to reinstate the previous snapshot, so let's go ahead and I create a new snapshot of the latest data, I can go in, create a snapshot there. So now we've got our history of snapshots. As we can see, there's our current version. But if we go back in time and go back in time further, there is the original data there. There is the data with the folder. We can revert if we choose to restore that older snapshot and then get our data back. Moreover, you can lock a snapshot if you choose, which can never be overwritten. So if you do that, that means that area of data and the way this layout of data is can never be overwritten. Just keep in mind, for example, when I created 50 snapshots of retention, once you create 51 snapshots, it overwrites the oldest one, but it will never overwrite a locked snapshot there. So again, if I go ahead and restore this older version with restore, the system will invite me if I wish to create another snapshot just before I restore, so I can even revert back to the changed version in case this doesn't resolve whatever data loss I encountered. I click restore and it does exactly that. As you can see, it's now restoring the snapshot. It's also created another snapshot there in case I want to revert back to that version too. Remember, snapshots are not the same as backups, because if you lose one of those snapshots in the middle, you lose all of the snapshots behind it. Next up, let's talk about backups. Now, backups can fall into different versions. For example, we mentioned earlier on in the video about the ability to create a system backup. This is a backup of the system configuration, folder layout, users, IPs, and more. Now, you will need a UI.com in order to do this, but if you do that, one click on this button here will allow you to back up the system configuration, and when needed, go ahead and click download, and it will download the latest backup to your system. You can even download a local copy if you choose to. So for example, create a download option there, click download, and you will download a local backup image of your system that you can upload later on if you choose to. On top of that, we can go for much larger backup options as well. Going in from the main option, you can either select Setup Now, or in the config option, from there, select backups, and you've got the backup option. Now, there are 3 different ways to back up your system. We'll select a folder, we'll go for the NAS Compare Share and click Select. You can choose, if you have another UniFi NAS, you can synchronize this UNAS with another UNAS. And this also works with remote access NAS as well. So if you've got 2 UniFi NASs in completely different network and internet locations, you can synchronize them with this option. Alternatively, use SMB or CIFS to synchronize with another NAS on a local area network. So for example, in my case, I used Advanced IP Scanner earlier to find other NASs in my network. And as you can see, there is a NAS right here. It's a Synology DS423 on the IP ending 122. So if I choose to, I can enter 192.168.122, enter the login credentials of that NAS, then click Connect. As you can see, it's found that NAS. Then I need to select the destination folder on the NAS. So in this case, I'm going to select the folder Net Backup, click Select, choose whether I want to keep the data on both systems or replace the data on the fly. From there, select when you want the backup to take place, if you want it on a schedule or just ad hoc. And of course, once that's all done, make sure you name your backup. And then from there, click Task, click Create Task and click Backup. And there you go. I've now created a UNAS to local NAS backup. Going back into the backup settings, of course, we can create a new task. And instead, this time, again, we'll use the NAS Compare Share folder. We can choose to back up via Google. Now, I'm sure they're going to be adding Dropbox and other services as well. But right now, because we haven't enabled a remote UI.com account, we can't access that feature without enabling remote access. And of course, remote access requires that UI account. But backing up with a cloud service is very straightforward, and just by having that remote access enabled, you can then add Google Drive, just entering the login credentials of your Google Drive and following exactly the same steps that we just went through for the NAS backup there. Next up, I want to talk about encryption. When you have got your storage areas here, you may want to apply encryption to certain folders or indeed the whole system. If you want to do that, go ahead and click the cog. From there, select Services, and from Services, go to the bottom where you've got the option to encrypt the drives. Encrypting a drive will require you to add a password, and then from that password, let's enter one there that's good enough. That password will mean that this particular area of storage needs login credentials in order to be accessed. So you select the drives in the system that you want to enable for encryption, so in this case the NAS Compare Share, and click Add. As you can see now, that's the data inside. We can go ahead and click Apply Changes. Now, encrypted drives have a good and a bad side. One, you will download the encryption key locally to your system, or you can go ahead and enter the password as mentioned. Now, for example, if when the system is running updates, if we go into here and select some of the updates, some larger updates like the UNAS Pro update will restart the system. And if that happens, in that scenario, a encrypted drive will require that password to remount. This allows you to ensure that if someone steals your UNAS server, that they can't access that folder that you've encrypted, whether it is with brute force hacking or otherwise, without your login credentials. And this is particularly strong if you use a UI.com account. However, remaining logged into the system will ensure that this encrypted drive can still be accessed. It's only in the event of a system restart, or if you manually choose to disconnect that drive and disable it via the encryption and ensure it needs to be reactivated. Next up, let's talk about accessing your storage without the web browser. Now, what you need to do is either select Mount Drives up here. Alternatively, you can go into the control plane just above that into Services. As you can see here, File Services, if you're a Windows user, it's highly recommended to use SMB. There isn't a client app right now for UniFi, but this is the one you should use if you do want to connect this NAS device via the local area network to your Windows machine. If you're a Mac user, use this address here. If you're a Windows user, use this address here. And if you're using the 10G connection, use the lower addresses accordingly. For me, I'm going to click this one here, and it's going to copy that address to my browser. From there, go into your Windows machine and go into the Computer tab, or this PC, depending on whether you're using Windows 10 or 11. From there, select Map Network Drive. From Map Network Drive, select a letter, in this case T, and then paste in the address that you have taken from the web browser on your UNAS and click Browse. It will find the NAS on your local area network alongside other NAS devices. From there, click down, and it will ask you to enter the login credentials that you've created for that local access portal on the system. Keep in mind when you are doing that your local access portal account needs to have sufficient authorization to access that shared area of storage. Click Remember My Credentials and then click OK. It lists all of the shared drives, as you can see there. So for example, I'm going to select Shared Drive Example and click OK. Then click Finish. And now, as you can see, the T drive of Shared Drive Example is now accessible on my Windows PC, and I no longer need to use the web browser. And if I choose to, I can drag and drop some images into here. So if we go ahead and drag those two images there, drag them into that folder, they'll make their way onto the NAS, refreshed very quickly. And if we make our way onto the NAS via the web browser, going into the shared drive, there's the two images I uploaded right there. Finally, let's talk about updates, because this is going to be really important into the smooth running of your system. Go into the settings menu there, and then from there go into the control plane, and then at the top go ahead and select updates. As you can see, there are two kinds of updates here. There is updates for the UNAS Pro and updates for Drive. Drive is the application. UNAS Pro is the whole NAS operating system. It allows you to know what the state of your updates are. The system will check periodically on the latest updates and availability, but keep in mind that if you have a UI.com account, you'll be able to access other versions of those updates. Last thing, make sure to sort out the notifications on your system to let you know when things go right and things go wrong, in the case of backup, synchronization, unauthorized access and more. The majority of these are much smoother when used with the mobile application and using a UI.com account, but nonetheless set up how and when you want notifications to happen to you when the good and the bad happens on your UNAS Pro. And there you go, that's how to set up your UniFi UNAS Pro the very first time. No doubt over time UniFi are going to integrate more features into this beyond those fundamental backup and file service applications, maybe bringing in Protect, maybe bringing in container applications. As more apps and services arrive, I may update this video or release a refresh next year. But apart from that, right now, you are good to go with your UNAS Pro. Have yourselves a fantastic week.